My next guest is Jen Manley. She is a current college instructor and former high school and middle school computer science teacher and curriculum developer. She is a skilled facilitator and is presented to thousands of educators at the local, state, and national levels. She is a certified Agile Leader K-12 trainer and a co-author of the Agile Educator Guide. Nationally, she has been recognized as an ITEEA Teacher Excellence awardee and a CS Teaching Excellence Honorable Mention. Welcome to the podcast, Jen.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Well, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Oh man, I always think back to my very first year of teaching, when I thought that I had to grade everything that I gave students. Me personally had to grade everything that I gave students. I started as a teacher midway through the year. I was a career changer. So I was taking education classes at the same time. And so I really didn't know what I was doing. I was thrown in the middle of the year. And I was the only person teaching any of my classes in the building. So I had nobody to plan with. The work was just overwhelming. I had so much that I had to do. And I just have this very distinct memory of my first time that I was submitting report cards. And I pulled an all-nighter because the report cards had to be in by 9 a.m. They weren't done. I still had all this work that I had to grade for students. And it was that moment where I pulled this all-nighter. I submitted the report cards. I went and taught a full day. And I was like, man, I have to figure this out because this cannot happen 4 times a year. This cannot be the way that I approach work. And, I think there's definitely something to be said about your first semester of teaching just being overwhelming. But I was able, over the next several years to figure out, okay, how do I tackle work more efficiently so that I'm not in this place of just constantly being behind and sacrificing, my physical health through lack of sleep to do it.
Yeah, and you learned that, like you said, after that first year. And I know right now you speak a lot on teacher retention, and we've talked a lot about teacher self-care, before and since the pandemic. But I know that when teachers aren't able to manage their time well, or work management in general, that can lead to people exiting the profession. So talk to me a little bit about some of the work you do with teachers and districts in terms of that teacher retention piece.
Yeah, totally. So I think, we talk a lot about teacher exodus, but what I really focus on are the great teachers who leave. So I think at this point, we are at a point where we are losing teachers who thought they were going to be career teachers, who love students, who are in it for all the right reasons, as they would say on The Bachelor, right? And they are just at a place where the workload is unsustainable. There is so much that is being asked of teachers. And I think, one of the things that I see when I work with teachers is teaching has this massive amount of job creep where teachers already have so many things on their plate. And then on top of that, new initiatives are added all of the time, and things aren't coming off to make room for new things that teachers are being asked to do. And so it's no wonder that teachers are overwhelmed, because the amount of work that teachers are being asked to do in the amount of time that they're contracted for is just not realistic. It's not reasonable. It's not 40 hours of work, right? It's not, it's overwhelming. And that is just what the education system is. And so one of the things that I talk with administrators about is, when we're thinking about that, obviously a lot of these initiatives are coming from even above school administrators, and they're just, giving them to the teachers because it comes from above them. But really thinking about, as an administrator, you're also a people manager. You're also in charge of helping teachers to do their best work and to center what's best for students. So what are we doing in these cases where we're helping teachers learn how to prioritize the tasks, the asks, the initiatives that are most important, so that the most important work always gets done? And we're letting teachers know that the expectation is not that they're leaving work at the end of the day with nothing left to do, because that's just impossible, right? Like even when I was working 55, 60 hours a week as a teacher, I still had stuff that didn't get done. So I think administrators can really support teachers and teacher retention by focusing on their role as managers, helping teachers to prioritize the work, helping teachers to know when it's okay to let things go, to not have things get done, canceling meetings when it doesn't make sense for everybody to be meeting, or shortening meetings if it's only going to take 20 minutes instead of 60 minutes that's been allotted, and really putting themselves in the position to support teachers for time and task management, and not just the actual teaching piece.
And, it seems like something that's not really that hard to figure out, but I think there's a lot of admin as well who aren't able to manage their time, especially if they're a new admin and really haven't had a good coach. So some of the work you do as well, helping the admin when they have those initiatives coming from the upper levels. And then because if the admin doesn't have it together, then it's going to affect the teachers.
Right. And I think, something that administrators can have at their disposal that teachers don't always have is this piece of delegation, right? So part of being a great leader in general is knowing when it's not your job to execute, it's your job to delegate to somebody else who can execute better than you, right? So school-based administrators understanding that like there's all of these things coming in, they're already overwhelmed, they already have a million things to do. How can we be the filter of some of those requests, but not necessarily the person who is taking ownership of all of those requests? And I think, that's what the best administrators are doing is, the best in terms of time and task management is they know how to manage the asks that are coming in, and kind of being like, my brain is envisioning, they're the captain, right? They're the person that, like, think about it, if you're your podcast is called In the Trenches, so we're going to do another war analogy, right? They're in the war room, they are delegating out where the pieces go and filtering out things that are less important, right? And giving that pushback when appropriate, when it's like, hey, you're asking my teachers to do X, Y, and Z, what's coming off the plate? Like, we're already doing these other initiatives. Where is this time coming from, right? And I think also recognizing that there's a little bit of risk there, right, for an administrator to speak up and speak out. And older administrators, more experienced, older is not the right word, but more experienced administrators have, just like tenured teachers, have a little bit more leverage in terms of like protection, right? They don't have to feel afraid that speaking up and questioning why something is necessary, that's going to come back on them, right? Because they've already established themselves as a successful teacher or a successful administrator.
Yeah, and I know it's like you said, it's using those people that you have, the admin assistants, people in the office, teacher leaders, or other people that might want admin internship hours, and filtering things out, like very important for admin who feel overwhelmed, because they do not have to do all those things that can be done in a more concise way. Something you also do PD on that frees up teacher time is helping teachers focus more on student-led learning. So they're not explicitly instructing the whole class period. So what are some tips that you bring into PLCs, for example, if they are doing a lot of a lot of more teacher talk than they should?
Yeah, totally. So I think the first thing that I always lead with is students are way more capable than I think we sometimes give them credit for. Like even now, right? And you and I talked about this a little bit before, but students are different now. Post-pandemic, students are different. And when I was in the classroom post-pandemic, they required a little bit more support because, especially with like phones, right? During student-led learning time, they needed more guidance with getting their phone put away so they weren't distracted by it, right? So there's obviously challenges that are in the classroom with giving students more responsibility and more autonomy. But at the core of that, our students are more capable than we often give them credit for. And it's very scary for teachers to give up control, right? Like we want to have, it's our classroom, like we want to have control. But what we know about child psychology is when kids feel like they're in control, they're less stressed. They also have more buy-in, right? Because they feel some sort of actual attachment to the work that's being done, right? When kids have control, when they own parts of their learning, they're more likely to be bought into the work that they're doing. And so, you know, if you're in a classroom, if you're a teacher or you're coaching teachers who have classrooms that are very teacher-centered, think about the first small step that you can give them. So one of the things that I talk to teachers about often is if you aren't in a classroom that's regularly doing independent work, how can we start with 10 minutes, right? How can we start with modeling what students should be doing during that independent group time, right? So if I'm going to give students 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an entire class period, like I would do in my classroom, I taught middle and high school, what structure are we giving them so that they can be successful versus, you know, looking at it and saying, well, I gave kids independent time and they don't do anything. Okay. They've never done it before. They don't have practice. It's an executive functioning skill. What support are we giving them? What scaffolds are we giving them so that later on in the year, they come in, they get to work, and they're using that class time productively themselves. So one of the first tips that I would give is start small. Start with giving them 10 minutes. Before you let them loose in that 10 minutes, if it's the first time you're ever doing it, give them a task list. Give them a broken down to-do list of exactly what you want them to accomplish during that time. And teachers already do this, right? They already do this with like single problems. And now we're thinking about it in terms of how can we give more of the learning process over to kids? And so starting small and adding structure so that they build that routine, they build those skills, and they're better able to then do it themselves.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like project-based learning in a way, like when you're breaking down pieces of a project and different due dates, thinking back to when I taught high school English, right? Something that might last a quarter and a book report, for example, and they were getting different things in at different dates, right? But then it's part of the larger project, but they are working a lot independently, like you said, but taking ownership, getting kids the time to also reflect on their learning as well. Am I correct in kind of the thinking of where you're going?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you said that kind of brought something else to the head for me, you know, my experience is unique because I've taught middle through college. And
Mhm,
one thing that I think I assumed when I was teaching secondary that I realized I was so wrong on when I got to college is that I assumed that kids who did not have 504s and IEP plans
mhm.
had executive functioning skills. And
Yeah.
actually, like now that I teach college and even, you know, my fall semester classes are always only freshmen. So they're like right after high school, right? But
Mm,
the difference in executive functioning between those first semester college freshmen and even like juniors in high school
yeah.
is so different. And so, you know, I think sometimes we have this assumption that kids should just be able to keep, like you said, right, breaking it down into deadlines. Like kids should just be able to do
Mhm,
that. Kids should just
mhm.
be able to self-chunk. And if they don't have a 504 IP, they have that skill. And the
Yeah,
reality is that executive functioning in kids' brains is not fully developed until something like 25.
yeah.
And so even our big kids, even high school students who do not have any sort of accommodation for executive functioning still benefit from executive functioning support. And that doesn't mean that they are, um, you know, choosing to be that way. It's just where their brain is currently. And so I think the more, especially if we're looking at giving students more autonomy, making the classroom more student-led, the more supports we can give for executive functioning, the more successful that's going to be in your classroom.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, like you said, it sometimes doesn't matter the age. It's also just setting up those structures, but also not expecting that maybe somebody in middle school or coming into high school is gonna know, like, how to do some of these things. It has to be retaught sometimes year to
Yeah,
year, so
yeah, totally.
So, I mentioned in the bio that you have participated in writing on the book Agile Educator Guide, and that you're an Agile K-12 trainer. Talk to me about what the trainer certification is, and what you all do as an alliance.
Yeah, totally. So, I started using Agile project management is from industry. So it's a way of managing. It started in software development, but it's now used in different businesses and different industries worldwide. But it's a way of approaching projects by working in short sprints to accomplish the most important work first and then iterating on it. So
Okay.
the focus is on delivering what they call an MVP, or a minimally viable product, and then continuing to build on it. The idea being, in industry, if something isn't to market, you're not making any money, right? So the idea is we need to get a shippable product. We need to have a finished product before we start adding all the bells and whistles. And all the bells and whistles can come, but what is the core, right, of what we're trying to deliver? So Agile project management, I discovered because my sister is a software engineer. I saw it mentioned at a training and was like,
Okay.
that looks cool. But essentially what it is a way to manage student work and more importantly, student group work, getting students to work in teams to tackle big projects piece by piece. So what's
Mm-hmm.
so wonderful about it is it's a structure to help students be able to self-chunk the project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Start tasking out what needs to be done, work collaboratively in a way where every student has ownership and buy into the project. They're not in, roles that maybe aren't as important. Every student has buy-in to the core of the project. And
Mm-hmm.
it teaches them collaboration, and it's real world because it's coming from industry. So the Agile Educator Guide breaks down essentially how to run a classroom on a spectrum of collaboration and there's two spectrums: collaboration and, oh my gosh, my mind is blanking. This is what happens when I'm recording things. I get nervous. But essentially, how do we bring in these skills into the
Yeah.
classroom? How do we teach students how to work collaboratively and like with autonomy so that they're owning it, right? So collaborating with each other, but also that that spectrum of autonomy where it's not the teacher running the learning, it's the students really running the learning. So Scrum Alliance, which is a national organization, brought together 8 different educators from all over the world, and we collaborated on this document, the Agile Educators Guide, and there is an awesome certification that teachers can get through an organization called Agile Classrooms. So Agile Classrooms Teacher, where they learn how to do this in the classroom and how to adapt it to their classroom.
Okay, yeah. So, like you said, for those teachers who want to learn more about doing student-centered work and having students, self-chunk those activities, maybe looking into this as a way to have, students work in those short sprints. So, we'll definitely add that to the show notes. You also have a large community of educators going that is called the Strategic Classroom. So it's your business, and what is a strategic classroom? How can that help educators who are members, and really in terms of what they need in their classrooms, and to also stay in education?
Yeah. So over the last, I think I've been creating content now for about 2 years, 2 years and a couple months. But I've been creating content for teachers. So Strategic Classroom is my handle on both Instagram and TikTok. And I provide tons of content on how to manage your time and then also how to set boundaries. So my goal, the thing that I am most passionate about, is helping great teachers stay in the profession and helping teachers realize that they're chasing impact, right? When teachers are working 50, 55, 60-hour weeks, it's because they care so much that they are chasing the most impactful version of a teacher they can be. The
Mhm.
problem with that is that when we spread ourselves into so many different directions every single day, we're actually not achieving impact, we're achieving exhaustion. So we're chasing impact, but actually teachers would feel much more impactful if instead of doing all of the things, they focused on the most important work all of the
Mhm.
time, right? What are the things that are going to help my students most urgently, right?
Yeah,
That's what our
yeah.
focus is. How do we do the most important work first? How do we do the work that serves students first? And be okay with not getting everything done, because constantly working 60-hour weeks, constantly working 55-hour weeks, whatever it is, leads to burnout. And a burnt out teacher doesn't impact anybody. A burnt out teacher
Mhm.
leaves. So the idea behind the work that I do is, here are some strategies, right? It's going to be productivity tips. It's going to be rooted in productivity and efficiency science. How do we get you to be the most efficient version of yourself within a system that is asking you to do way more than you should be, right?
Mhm.
And so, again, centering students, assuming that teachers are coming to my community because they love teaching, they care about kids, they want to be teaching forever. And how can we make this job sustainable? How do we make
Yeah.
it so that you can have the impact you want without burning yourself out?
Yeah, yeah. And that's what we're all here for, is trying to retain good teachers, right? So many have left the profession in the past several years, but really learning how to say no, learning how to, manage your time wisely and, delegate tasks as well goes a long way. And like you said, you've been creating content, but you also do some support. So I've, connected with you through the Teach Better team, but you support edupreneurs in being more visible on social media. And that's also something that you do on a separate Instagram. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things, like I said, that I've loved doing for the last several years is creating content on social media and being able to connect with educators in that way. And so one of the things that I've been able to do is support other edupreneurs who are, wanting to widen their impact.
Hmm.
They are experts in what they do, and helping them to figure out, like, how do I show up as that on social media? There are
Hmm.
people who are already making an impact, and it's just figuring out how to translate the work they're already doing into the format for social media.
Yeah.
So I do that through, I have an Instagram, Jen Manley Creates. I have a couple courses and like on-demand webinars that people can engage with. Um, and I also offer one-on-one support.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. And, we're happy to have you, those of us who are in the entrepreneur field. And, for somebody who's been working with getting their content out and have a lot of followers, it's always great to get tips from people like you. Well, we've had a great conversation today around your work, both working in middle school, high school, and with college students. Some of the PD you give around time management, student-led learning, and also the Agile Educator training and the guide. Out of everything we've talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I think the number one thing I want listeners to take away is that you can't serve your students if you're gone.
Yeah.
And taking care of yourself feels selfish, but
Hmm.
sometimes being selfish is actually what's best for kids. Like, it is best for kids for great teachers to stay in the profession. And if
Hmm.
that means having to figure out how to work a little bit smarter within the constraints of the day that we have, that is what is going to keep you in the profession longer. That is what is going to allow you to serve kids longer. So many times in education, we hear to do what's best for kids, and we take that to mean to do more. But
Yeah.
actually, the way to increase your impact is to do enough so that you still have time and energy for yourself and your passions and your family and your friends outside of teaching too.
Hmm. Hmm. So important to remember. Well, where can people connect with you and find you online?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Strategic Classroom. I'm also on Instagram at Jen Manley Creates, and you can shoot me an email at jenmanleyedu@gmail.com.
Great. Well, it was a pleasure having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It's great to be able to promote the work of people like you that are there to support educators.
Thank you so much for having me.